So we're up and running, and then this guy shows up.
I remember when that jacket used to fit.
So let's get into, and we're going to get into some of your stories of the bunker, but let's get into your personal story, because it all ties together, of how you ended up here at the Greenbrier. What just go from point A, how did you end up here at the Greenbrier?
Well, back in the 70s, I finished my graduate work at Case Western Reserve in 75, and I ended up living in Washington, D.C., and my career did not seem to be materializing, shall we say. And, you know, one of the side effects of Vietnam was, you know, a lot of people went on to get graduate degrees. And there was sort of a surplus of history. My degree actually was in American Studies. And, you know, the job market was really tight, you know, and I could see, and I did get a position up in Washington, grant supported, but you know, the grant ends, the job ends, you know, and I'd be going to conventions, and there were a lot of, you know, one-year assignments, and prospects weren't getting, and so, and this is before I had children, before I had a mortgage, you know, I was 30 years old. I had a different wife. That's sort of a scandalous idea. You know, Betsy and I have been married for 35 years, but so we came down to West Virginia almost on a lark, you know. We'd come to Pipestem and seen this end of the property, end of the world, and this area had a reputation for a lot of back to the land people. So you got this beautiful countryside, and you had a lot of interesting people, you know, some trust fund babies that were back to the land people, and serious back to the landers, and some outright stoners too. And so it was a real mix of people, you know. And again, I was thinking.
I won't ask what category you were in.
Yeah, that's right. We all went to Grateful Dead concerts, and I've been to 5 Grateful Dead concerts, incidentally. And but again, you know, I wasn't thinking. This is back then. I sort of moved. I think in the 10 years previous, I'd moved 5 or 6 times. You know. Anyway, so we get down here, but pretty soon you need an income. Son of a gun. And I didn't know anything about the Greenbrier, but they're a major employer. So, you know, back when it was still called the personnel office, across the street, you know, I went and just filled out the personnel form. And I'm not sure, I've often thought in hindsight that the fact there was a guy named Jack Horton was at the Greenbrier for, you know, 35 years. Sharon Rowe's father, and he was a real history buff. And he was temporarily the head of personnel. And I have a feeling he kind of looked, you know, I guess not many PhDs applied for jobs there, you know. And
were you just applying for anything at the time, or was
yeah. And in fact, my plan was to open a bookstore in Lewisburg, and that wasn't materializing either for just real estate, and I'd actually put some effort into it. And I was coming here thinking I just need an income to keep body and soul together. In fact, we were talking pretty seriously about starting me on the front desk, and I was, you know, hey, I just need a salary. And when in the process of doing all this, I met Bill Pitt. Bill Pitt was the general manager at the time. He later was the president, but this is in 1978. He was still a general manager. And so Bill Pitt comes up with this idea. Bill Pitt, in hindsight, clearly a genius, because what had happened was a woman on the staff who I never met. Her name was Samantha Brown. She gave tours and did publicity, and she had some health issues. And this is stories I heard. I didn't know about it. And she started to organize the historical material. Well, her health issues got worse. She died. I must have come in, I still not a month, 2 months. So Bill's thinking, you know, this project had started, and the Samantha was there, and here's a guy walks in who worked in archives. So he suggests, he takes me up to the above the, you know, when you drive up the front of the hotel, the wing on the left, the two-story wing's the Virginia wing. There's an attic that runs all over there. And all of the items that Samantha had gathered ended up in these big laundry bins up in this attic. So Bill takes me up there. And you know these laundry bins, you see the houseman pushing around. There were 15 of them lined up, just piled with stuff. And he said, well, you know, here's our history. And rather famously said, do whatever it is historians do. And I remember thinking, this guy doesn't know what historians do. This is a good situation. I thought, yes, sir. And that's how it started, you know. And again, you know, we're thinking it's a project, 2-3 years. And I mean, years later, Bill and I were reminiscing about this, and both of us were sitting thinking the exact same thing. 2-3 years, something like that.
Right.
And so off I started. And so really, we took all this material out to one of the cottages right next to the museum. And for the first year, I didn't really come out very much, you know. I was, except for lunch. And lunch was the high point of the day back then.
It hadn't changed much for you.
Yeah.
If you want Bob to show up to something, offer lunch, he'll be there.
Yeah, right behind you, the famous, used to be called the Chatterbox when you had lunch. You know. Anyway, and so really, that's how I didn't know anything about the Greenbrier at that point. So I spent a considerable amount of time just going through all this material, you know, beginning it organized and you know, and realizing that there had been a book on the history of the Greenbrier, but as an academic, you know, I was interested in a book, and so really from the get-go I said, oh my gosh, there's material here for, and it really, to a large degree, that was my goal. I wanted to get a book out of this.
Do you remember the first time that you heard anything about a bunker?
Yes, I do, and it was, there was, you know, I moved down here, there was a few months between when I got here and I moved down to Monroe County and started the job. And there was a young woman here, one of the outsiders. You know, she was from Manhattan. And I remember she said to me, "Do you know why there's such a large airport in Lewisburg?" Oh, I have no idea. She said, "Well, that's because there's a bomb shelter at the Greenbrier, under the Greenbrier, and the government people are going to fly in to the Lewisburg airport, and then they're going to come to the Greenbrier." And you know, that was the first inkling I ever had. And then, you know, like everybody else, I sort of heard, you know, people talk about there's some bomb shelter at the Greenbrier. So when I got here, I wonder about my innocence. I went to the chief engineer, Luther Way, and just asked him, you know, what's this I hear about a bomb? I figured if anybody knows, the chief engineer has to know. So Luther Way had been the chief engineer for quite a few years at that point. Now you need to know that Luther Way was an outstanding guy. He was an upright guy. I mean, if Luther Way told you something, he was a pillar of the community. And I remember walking away, what's this I hear about a bomb? And he laughed, you know. He said, "Is that stupid rumor still out?" This is 1978. I remember that it had been finished in 1962. He laughed. "Is that stupid rumor still out there?" And he said, "You know, we've been trying for years to get people, and you know, it goes back to when we built the West Virginia wing. You know, when we dug the substructure where the exhibit hall is, and it was the peak of the fallout shelter, and people knew there was a close relationship between the government and the Greenbrier, and Eisenhower used to come here, and this rumor started. Try as we may, we can't seem to kill it. Now, of course, it turns out that Luther Way was involved up to his eyeballs. He was one of the very first people brought in on this project. But again, it was like, if Luther Way says there's no bomb shelter, well, there's no bomb shelter.
So you completely bought the story at that time, right?
Well, exactly. I mean, that's why there was always this doubt. Now, I remember I was walking down the corridor, maybe it was either right out here or right above us, and I'd somehow become friendly with a guy named Jim Hicks. He ran the setup crew. And he and two other guys were walking down the corridor, and I can't remember if this is before or after the Luther Way thing, but I remember I went up to Jim and I said, so we're standing in public, you know, and I say, what's this I hear about a bomb shelter at the Greenbrier? And the three of them, they each took a sort of step back and they sort of looked at their feet, you know, and it was pretty clear I just asked the wrong question, you know. You know, it's like asking, have you stopped beating your wife, sort of thing, you know. This was not an appropriate question. And they all kind of, you know, blah, 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 blah. I remember Jim said, well, I've never seen it. And then this other guy, who I think was Hoot. Do you remember Hoot? Anyway, he was one of the cleared engineering guys. I remember he looked at me, and I can't really remember if he had a toothpick in his mouth. It seemed like he should have for the story. And he kind of looked at me and he said, they don't like you asking too many questions about that around here. And that was kind of, I just got a word to the wise, okay? We'll all be a lot better if we just don't talk about it.
So that there come a point, even with all the denials, that you were pretty confident that something was there?
I kept hearing it from so many different, from guests, from, you know, and they all had sort of different stories, and but it all had something to do with, people said, oh, they're going to drive the limousines, and where those double doors are, they're gonna drive the limousines through those doors. And the other thing was, a bunker, I always thought, by definition, was way, way underground.
Right.
And so they would actually drive the limousines through these doors from the airport, and then they would go hundreds of feet down to this, where this bunker was. And but you know, I'm still thinking about what Luther Way said, and I think what I finally decided was, they must have built something. I mean, there can't be this many stories from this disparate population. But maybe they closed it down. You know, I mean, the Forsyth people, Fritz and those people, were real good about covering their tracks, you know. And so by now, it's, what, 16, 17 years later, and I think I sort of rationalized that maybe, you know, they built it, but it's not there anymore, or they closed it down, and because you know, we didn't get up each morning and come to work and say, boy, I hope I find out if there's a bunker at the Greenbrier, you know. And again, we're talking about sort of the end of the world scenario here, you know, and most of us spend our lives worrying about, you know, can I keep my job? Am I going to stay married? Am I have my kids? You know, and the end of the world is not a high priority thing to think about on a daily basis. Was
there ever any question in your mind, or did you ever doubt, what is this Forsyth team doing, or were you?
Actually, somewhere along the line, a fairly long time employee said to me, she said, well, we were talking about what we had heard. And at some point I sort of missed those days, the mystery days, you know,
right.
when we would get together in the corner, you know, what have you heard, you know, and we kind of swap stories. And it was one of those situations where I was talking to somebody, you know, what have you heard? And I remember she said, well, people say that's what Fritz really does to her. And it was like, oh, you know, this had never crossed my mind. Fritz and Forsyth. Yeah, but I learned pretty quickly that life will be better. I mean, the classic stories are shortly after I got here. a newspaper person showed up. Now remember, it was 1978. So we used the date 1778, so it was kind of the bicentennial of the Greenbrier, right? So this reporter came from Charleston, and things were a little lax. Now that I think about it, she just came right to me. She didn't go through official channels. And I didn't know there were official channels. And so I remember she came out, and we did this long interview about the history of the Greenbrier. And in fact, I think it was a wire service. And it was in the afternoon. And then a day or two later, she called and she said, well, when I got back to my office, her colleagues at the office said, well, did you ask that guy about that bomb shelter at the Greenbrier? And she said, is there a bomb shelter at the Greenbrier? I had talked to Luther Way. I repeated exactly what Luther Way said. Old story, started back in the 60s, there's nothing to it, stupid rumor. She writes the story, long whole story all about, the history of the Greenbrier. The last sentence, historian denies there's a bomb shelter at the Greenbrier.
How deep is the bunker down in the ground?
Huh?
How deep is the bunker?
How?
How deep is the bunker?
Well, it's really not that deep. I mean, it's just right there, When they talk about how deep it is, it being 700 feet, that's straight back into the mountain. That's not deep that way. I mean, it's just right there at the, off the exhibit hall. Anyway, the point of this story is, the story is published, and I don't know how many newspapers shows up in, and I get a call from Bill Pitt. And I'm thinking he's going to congratulate me. I've generated this publicity for the Greenbrier, and the head of PR, a guy named Jim Searle, is sitting there, and he says, "You see this story? You see that last line there?" He said, "We hate when this subject comes up, because what's going to happen," he tells me, "is all kind of wacko people are going to show up here, and they're going to be saying, 'Where's the secret bunker?' and so, And you have to sort of know Bill. Bill was sort of an excitable guy. and the more he talked about how we don't want this subject brought up, the more excited he got. And at one point, he banged his hand on his desk. He said, "There's no goddamn bunker at the Greenbrier." And that's the moment I thought, there's probably a bunker at the Greenbrier. And I thought, anything denied this vehemently is probably true. But again, I got the message, don't ask questions. And that's really, again, a part of that, just be very low profile.
So as Bob said, he came here for what both you and Bill Pitt thought was going to be a 2 or 3 month job, or 2 or 3 year job. You said.
Yeah.
And you stayed on much longer, but the real story of the reason you stayed on much longer is that bottom picture there on the left-hand side of the slide, correct?
Oh, yeah. yeah, really, exactly. Well, so at some point, I was between marriages, as they say. And again, part of it was I was working on this book. I was determined to get this book finished. And the position of Director of Social Activities became available. And and I did a lot of, so in general, I'd work closely with whoever was the Director of Social Activities. And they tend to be young women, and they stayed a couple years and they left. Now, and then this person, Betsy Powers, had come up on several occasions to do presentations over the holidays here. So I met her on several occasions. Remember, she came up with her mother at one time. I remember we went to the old White Club. I think I was the only one who had a drink, if I recall. Anyway, so when the position of Director of Social Activity comes open, they call down to Charlotte and ask Betsy if she's interested. And she has the same story. I'll go up there for, a couple of years, something like that. This isn't the greatest place to be single, So I remember she shows up, and oh my, I said, well, I gotta train this young lady on the history of the Greenbrier.
Taking one for the team, are you?
She has to do tours, and we want to make sure that she's accurate when she gives these tours, you know. And so, there were back in the 19th century, there were these other mineral springs around here, and so as part of introducing her to that history, we took an afternoon. We went over to Sweet Springs, which is not too far. And back in the 19th century, it was almost a similar resort to this. And I remember we went to Sweet Springs, and I remember we drove up on that hill, and we went to a cemetery. You know, and we're going out with a historian. Our first day, we go to a cemetery. You know, and she seems to be absorbing. She's real interested in all this history. You know, and there's a lot of history. And so we get back here, and let's have dinner in the dining room. You know, I mean, we're tired. It's been a rough day out there. How am I going to forget his name? The major
Jack
did.
O'Donnell.
Jack O'Donnell. Oh my God, that's right. And we show up, and Jack had been the major D, and he sort of caught on immediately. Kind of found us a cozy little table there, and one thing led to another, and pretty soon.
So Betsy, he took you on a first date to a cemetery. Is that what you're doing?
That's correct. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. but I don't think he realized the history that I had in Charlotte, in Mecklenburg County. So I don't know. I mean, we always would go to a cemetery on Sunday, you know.
Right.
So yeah, there was, and if you remember, we talked about this once before. There was that green dress that she had. That was,
Right.
Yeah.
The green dress she had, and then you had a car you were trying to show off. Is that right, Betsy?
That's right.
Oh yeah, that green dress. Yeah, we were walking over to the museum, and I had gotten a little inheritance after my dad died, and I bought this. I know it's kind of a contradiction in term, but it was a Subaru sports car. It was a sporty little thing. They called it an XT Coupe. They only made it for 5 years or so, and it was a snazzy little car. And I had it parked right in front of Paradise Row. So we were walking by it as we were going to the museum. And I remember, if you're a historian, you have sort of an image problem, And so as we're walking by, I said, oh, let me stop. There's something in my car here. So I could pass the message on that I drive this snazzy little car. And I think, I saw the green dress, she saw my snazzy little car.
It's always the car with women.
The rest is history, right?
Yeah. So it's 35 years now we've been married.
So Betsy keeps you here, and then we move on down the road. It's 1992, and a reporter. Does he show up at your office door, or does he call you first?
It's a funny story in the sense that in 1992, the National Archives up in Washington, D.C. was celebrating 50 years since World War II. This will make sense in a moment. And so I got a call from the National Archives, and they asked me if I would come up and talk about when the diplomats were here. They had a luncheon series, a lecture series, and so it was kind of good. I had a cousin who was a pretty high-ranking guy in the archives back then, and so yeah, I'd worked on a grant project there. So anyway, yeah, we took up the invitation. And plus, there was a guy here on the staff who had connection to the Willard Hotel in Washington. So stayed in the Willard in Washington. Now, I say all this because I guess in the Washington Post, back in their book review section, they had a little literary events, and it was posted in there that the historian from the Greenbrier is going to speak at the National Archives about the Greenbrier in World War II. Ted Gup, the guy who wrote the article in the Washington Post, saw that. And apparently, he told me this later, he meant to come to that. And for some reason couldn't. And I've often thought, oh my God, I'm glad he didn't come, because, you know, this whole subject, it would come up all the time, and I would usually just deny it. But, you know, when you're out of town, you're a little bit more lax, and you know, he knew a lot. And I'm always really happy that he did not show up for that talk. So when he came here, again, it was about this time of year in 1992, he wanted to interview 3 people. Ted Kleisner, the president, Fritz Bugas, and he knew that it was a historian at the Greenbrier. And Fritz, luckily, just happened to be on vacation. He was down in Florida. Not only was he down in Florida, but he was in an accident or something, you know. So he was not available. So when Ted Gup comes here, you know, I'm on his. Now I didn't know this. The way I found out was one day Ted Kleisner stopped in my office to talk to me. Now, which was very unusual. I knew it was a serious situation, because if he wanted to talk to me, usually you went to his office. He didn't come to your office, you know. So the fact that he came to my office, I knew something's up. And he said, there's a guy here, and he's asking all these questions about what's under the West Virginia wing. And Ted then starts to say pretty much what Luther Way had said many years before. Oh, it's a story that's been around for years and years. It started during the West Virginia wing, blah, blah, blah. And it was like one of those kind of, you know that I know that you know. And so, yes, sir, yeah, I got it. And so turns out, you know, I get this phone call. This is Ted Gup from the Washington Post, and you know, can I come talk to you? Sure. And I remember my office then was up above the swimming pool, and where Daryl Brackenridge is today. And son of a gun, this guy walks in, puts a tape recorder on my desk, pushes the button, and says, I'm here to talk about what's under the West Virginia wing. Now I'm on my home turf. I'm the official spokesperson. He's, you know, got his Washington Post hat on. And I just tell exactly what Luther Way told me, you know, 30 years before. You know, and he looks at me, he does not believe one word I just said. And we're kind of looking at each other. And, you know, uh-oh, what now? And so I strike upon an interesting proposal. I say, look, I maintain the archives. And by this point, you know, I've been here 14, 15 years. I've pretty much seen every scrap of paper. I say, you can open any of these drawers, and you'll see that there's no evidence of a bunker at the Greenbrier. And I thought this was pretty clever. You know? But he took me up on it. And he sat there, and I must admit, I was pretty impressed in terms of just sort of gumshoe research. You know, this guy did his work. And it was pretty clear that he knew way more than I did. In fact, I had to restrain myself from saying, well, tell me what you know. You know. But I realized I can't do that, right? And I got my Greenbrier history hat on. And so he spent quite a bit of time. But it turns out that there was an employee publication called the Briar Chat, the one you revived recently, by and for employees, and it had been produced here for 30 years or so, and he found some of these, this is pretty clever. He actually focused in on the Briar Chats from the construction years, and then he wrote down names of employees, and then he went back to his room and he called all these people. And again, just sort of, real gumshoe reason. And I talked to him years later. He came back once and he said, "Oh, you were kind of helpful." And I said, "Well, I didn't want to be helpful. I was trying my damnedest to mislead you, because he apparently called a bunch, and he said a lot of people just hung up on him, and some people would just add a little bit more. These are people maybe who worked there 10, 15 years ago, and really weren't sure what the situation was. But it was all part of him putting together the puzzle. So I remember it was late January or early February when this happened. And incidentally, what happened was like a week later, we had our PR done by people in Parkersburg back then, Fahlgren Martin. And Mr. Fahlgren asked me if I would speak to the Rotary Club. So we go up there. I remember it was the middle of winter, and Parkersburg is on one side of that, and Marietta is on the other side. And so we went over to Marietta. And I've spoken to a lot of Rotary clubs over my time here, but this was a big Rotary club. I remember I got there and there were seemed like hundreds of people. I was kind of, oh my God, look at this crowd. And so I had a PowerPoint and I tell the whole story and I open it for questions, And the guy way in the back says, "What about that bomb shelter at the Greenbrier?" And this is like a week after I've talked to Ted Gup, and I know the story's coming out.
Right.
I know Ted's got the story. And I'm thinking, that son of a bitch, why would he ask that question, And, I just repeated what Luther Way said. There's no bunker at the Greenbrier. It's a rumor that started. I just said the whole thing one more time, knowing that pretty soon it's going to.
So how long after the interview was the story published?
If that was late January, early February, it was Memorial Day weekend.
Okay.
Memorial Day was funny that way it played out that year. So it was May 31st. The article one was May 31st, 1992. Memorial Day had been the weekend before, which incidentally was an issue because back then when Memorial Day, CSX had a big event, and Tom Watson would come here, and they had a big golf event of all their, and they were worried here that the story would come out right as all the CSX people were entertaining all their biggest customers, and then all the CSX people didn't know. Very few members of the board of directors. I mean, they were not kidding about keeping that information to the CEO and the chief legal counsel were pretty much the only people at CSX who knew the story.
So did you know at that point, had you actually seen the bunker? I mean, at what point did you actually know that?
Oh, no, I'd never seen it. So it's just 1992, and then, so the article hits, actually, it's really classic. It was in the Washington Post magazine section. This is Washington, like everybody else, I don't get the print. I don't know if there is a magazine section. It was a Sunday magazine section. And so it was pre-printed, like on Wednesday, and somehow the people at the Washington Times got a hold of that story. So they did their research, and so they actually broke the story on a Friday before the Washington Post story came out on the Sunday. And that's when I remember Dorothy Miller, the secretary here, said, "Mr. Kleisner wants you to be in a meeting at a certain time." And she said, I think it's about that bunker. And it was the first time that somebody had actually said that word about the bunker. And I kind of looked at her like, and I'd never heard anybody so we had this meeting. And it turns out we were having some sort of big bicycle event on this Friday. And we all met in Ted Kleisner's office. And
How many people were there? How many people were in that meeting?
In that meeting? Well, it was sort of anybody who had a lot of public, on the staff, who had kind of public interaction, so as giving tours.
Right.
And the press was on the way. That was the other thing that, so people on the front desk, the people who they thought were going to be bombarded with. Betsy was on maternity leave at this point. So our daughter, Mary Cecilia, had just been born a couple of weeks before. And this was really one of the most stunning moments, I think, in my life. You know, Ted Kleistner, you know, we are about to acknowledge a 35-year relationship with the federal government. You know, and Fritz Bugis is sitting over there. You know, and that's when they made that tape. You've seen it, I suppose. They made a tape that, to the board of directors and of CSX, explaining there was some government official. Actually, it turns out later, where it was filmed in the bunker here, and explaining to the board of directors of CSX how this relationship had evolved. But that was the other thing. He slips in, of course, a VHS tape. He slips us in the player, and this very official-looking person talking with a big seal says that if you are watching this video, the security breach has happened. Something, and another just unbelievable moment, you know, has happened, and then they kind of explained this whole story going back to the 50s and how the relationship had begun.
And then shortly after that, another unbelievable moment is when you actually walk into the bunker for the first time and see it.
Well, you know, the unusual thing is, this is May of '92, and there were all these stories. Oh my God, you know, Hotel Armageddon, you know, and you know, it was a banner headline in my hometown newspaper, the Saturday Mercury News, and you know, I ended up spending the day driving around in limos talking to newspaper people as if I knew. You know, I think just repeating what I had learned that morning, you know, and all of a sudden I'm an expert talking to the press, you know, and hundreds and hundreds of magazines, newspapers, but then nothing happened, and nothing happened for 3 years, and it was kind of weird. Yes, there's a bunker, but no, we can't go there because CSX and the Defense Department were kind of negotiating closing it down, basically. So that's when they began the process of taking things out and taking the communications equipment out. I remember Fritz saying, you know, part of the secret was the secret communications equipment in there, and he had to deal with the National Security Agency, and they had to sign for every little piece, you know. Fritz would pass it over and they'd sign it, because I think they had a pretty high level communication system in there. Anyway, so it took quite a while. It took 3 years actually. Now, so finally when everything was resolved between CSX and the government, they decided it was time to open it up, and that's when Fritz actually took me through. So the first time I get a call, I bugged him a few times, like, "Hey Fritz, you know." Fritz Bugis was the head of Forsyth Associates, and incidentally, for those of you who knew Fritz, Betsy and I visited him just in October. We went down there. Fritz is 95 years old, living down in Richmond, and you know, he's using a walker to get around, but he's still got it up here. So it was really a delight to spend some time with Fritz. But I remember I got a phone call, and Jack DeMoli, who was the resident manager at the time, and I went through together.
Looking at the slideshow, the Dateline story that was done on the bunker, when was that?
Well, so at this point, the time we're talking about here, I think they'd already filmed the Dateline. So what happened was the PR firm, the Mark that I was talking about, they realized this is a great story. I mean, this is probably one of the biggest PR stories in the history of the Greenbrier. And we got to, they're PR people. We want to strike while the iron's hot. We want to milk this story for what we can. And so they went out and approached the networks and said, we got a great story for you. There's this secret bunker, and we'll offer you access if you'll give us prime time. And Ray Hoffman worked for Farmer Martin, and to this day, I still, they were headquartered in Philadelphia. I still bother him about this. He said, we got to strike hot, and because Americans are famous for short-term memories. This is a big story. He said, but within a year, everybody's going to forget about it. It's going to go, oh, so yesterday. And every time I'm still stay in touch with him. Hey, Ray, remember what you said back then? So he literally, Ray, went to the networks. And so NBC agreed to do it.
And let me assure you, as the person in those shoes now,
right.
that is the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
90% of the time that my phone rings and it's a reporter, that's what they want to talk about still to this day. And it's funny because everybody who calls acts like it's something new. Like, we want to do this feature on the bunker, and we think that's a really neat story. And really, I've never heard that before. But I mean, to this, the biggest PR event that we've had since I've been here was the Today Show coming to do. They were live from the bunker. I don't know what year that was. Probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago. But it's still today the biggest publicity we get is still surrounding the bunker.
So
Yeah.
the golf guy, did he ever explain to you why he wanted to do this story?
Ted Gup, did he explain why he wanted to? What was his motivation for breaking the story?
Oh, Ted Gup?
Ted Gup. Yep.
Well, the first thing you need to know is the Cold War had ended. So remember, the Berlin Wall had come down. There was no longer a Soviet Union. And he had done an earlier article called The Doomsday Project in Time magazine. So incidentally, when he made this reservation, and he wanted a room in the fourth floor of the West Virginia wing, a very obscure section of the building. And that was very curious that a Washington Post, why does he want a room over there? So our then PR person, Sharon Rowe, starts to look into who is this guy, Ted Gup? And they see, oh my God, 6 months earlier, he'd written this story in Time magazine about what he called the Doomsday Project, which was more about Mount Weather and the whole continuity of government program. And so they realized this isn't just a regular travel article. So all the red flags went up at that point. So the larger context was, do we need these facilities? Remember, they talked about the peace dividend after the Cold War ended. Do we need? And then there are all these base closings, and really, in some ways, I think the way the story got out is that in reviewing not only this facility but other facilities, with that question, do we need these anymore? More people learned about it than had in the past. I mean, this, people around here can be sort of flippant, oh, we knew about it all the time, but within the government, it was highly, the term compartmentalized. This guy knows, but that guy doesn't, about this facility. And so Gup was sort of it. That was his larger interest, is the whole continuity program. Is that going to survive in the post-Cold War years? And somewhere along the line, maybe because he had written this article in Time magazine, he became kind of the guy who writes about nuclear disaster. And the story I heard, incidentally, and is still one of those, because Ted Gup is going to go to his grave with the names. I know that of who actually contacted him. But I met a guy who worked with Ted Gup, who talked to him quite a bit. And he said what happened was, they started this process. Do we need the facility down here anymore? And of course, there was not unanimity of opinion. There were certain people who said, look, it's bought and paid for, we ought to, you never know, just in case. I was just reading an article recently. They were talking to Tom Foley, who was Speaker of the House at the time. He said, really, the money is the design and the construction. The actual maintenance of the bunker wasn't that much. And so, it's there. We ought to just keep it. There were these other people within the security world who said it's obsolete. It had made perfect sense when it was built. But there, with the number of missiles, the targeting of missiles, it did its job. And so, we ought to just acknowledge that and close it down. And the other point was that if we don't close it down, and 5 years from now, or sometime the word gets out, the government is going to be assailed by people saying, you're spending taxpayer money on a war that's over, with the Cold War is over. You're wasting taxpayer money. So what we should do is just close it down. Those people, when they couldn't get traction with this argument, those people contacted Ted Gup. So it wasn't just one individual, it was a group of people who believed that, it served its purpose, and, it's time to close it down. So, they knew they weren't going to get anywhere through government meetings, and you know how things are. If you want to get something done in Washington, leak it to the Washington Post. And it worked, So, that may or may not be the story, but that's kind of the one I bought into.
You brought up something there with Sharon Rowe and the red flags. Was she in pretty much your position where she sort of knew something was going on but didn't officially know anything was going on?
No, I think she had been cleared.
She had been cleared?
Yeah. People all talk about what an eerie sensation it was. They would take you into this room. Well, Forsyth maintained a building over where the stables are today. When they would turn the sound up, and these people would come out and they would show you badges, and they would say their name, and they would say, that's not really my name. And apparently it was quite an experience when you were, and then again, you had to have a need to know. And so it was primarily the engineering people, the finance people, who were sending the bills to the government, and at some point Sharon Rowe was cleared, and of course, but again cleared. Not everybody was given all the information. Sort of the secret within the secret, and the thing they really never wanted to get out was that the client was Congress. And even I met a guy once who was in a room with LBJ when this thing first opened. And from the get-go, Lyndon Johnson knew that if word ever got out, that because, oh yeah, we got a bunker at this incredibly lavish resort. He knew precisely people were going to say, oh yeah, Congress is going to go down and they're going to be sipping tea and playing golf and eating in the main dining room while the rest of us fry. They're all going to be at the Greenbrier. Well, at the Greenbrier, the over at Greenbrier, So he knew that it would be a public relations disaster for Congress from the get-go. He said, if that ever happened, we're just going to have to walk away from it.
And a lot of people, I know the rumors that I heard when I was a kid, it was always the president.
Right.
A lot of people always thought it was.
And actually, they thought that was a nice piece of nice piece of misinformation.
Right.
Because it directed people away from the whole idea. And that was the big surprise when we finally went in, you know, Jack Demoli and I, this was just shortly before the Dateline piece. That's the first clue I had that this was for, and it really took a couple of tours for this to sink in, you know, that this was all built around that idea that Congress would remain the functioning legislative branch. Where was I going with that? You can read my mind, can't you? So yeah, they knew that was highly sensitive. That this is where which made that the very first tours given of the bunker were to Greenbrier employees. So Fritz Pugh, this is his name, I mentioned the number. I remember he said to me, this is going to be kind of a thank you gift to the Greenbrier employees. He said, because he knew perfectly well that they had rumors, and they sort of caught on that we talk about this amongst ourselves maybe, but we don't talk about this to the public. And he said, I'm not going to say this publicly, but this is going to be kind of a thank you to Greenbrier employees. And since I gave tours, you know, he took me through so that I could help him give tours after the Dateline program beamed. So that was an interesting experience. I was taken through people who'd worked here 20, 30 years. They had all, you know, grown up hearing these stories around here. And so what was the big shock was, how big it was. You know, I mean, in the secret days, you know, what's a bunker? I don't know what a bunker is. I've never seen a bunker. I thought of
one room for the president, maybe.
Yeah, and a few aides, you know.
Right.
And I don't know what a bunker would be like, you know, maybe some food or something. But, you know, it just kind of went on and on, you know. I remember that day and then we go over to this room and then we go to that room and you know, oh my gosh. And so it was the same for these employees who were struck by, the size of the facility, the fact that it was for Congress, and then it fit into this larger continuity of government. In other words, the reality was way more impressive than the rumors. Usually the rumors were sexier than the reality, you know? But this is the case where the reality, and I think all the employees were sort of like myself, a real jaw dropper as you saw how big this operation was and the complexity and all the things they had to think about to keep 1,000 people alive underground under very, very dire circumstances.
And I remember you saying one of your biggest shocks was still, I think a lot of people's biggest shock when they go on a bunker tour today is that they hit that up button on the elevator to get up to the bunker.
Right, yeah. That was the first, I remember I met Fritz by these double doors that were mentioned, and we just opened the doors and we walk in. And I said, wait a minute, don't we have to go over to the elevator there and push the secret button and you have a key? And he said, no, that's one of those stories that's been around for years. And again, they kind of like those stories because it diverted from the reality. I remember I can't believe, and the first thing, it takes me on the tour, and the first place we go is into the kitchen. And old Fritz is going on about how they got the food. And I'm looking at this kitchen. It looks like we're in a high school, gym. You know, and this is the secret bunker. And I go, whoa, this is very exciting, you know. And he's telling me about the freeze-dried food, and oh my God. But then, you know, we went to another room, and then to another room, and the engineering. It was just sort of an overwhelming experience.
One of the things I always think about that I find fascinating is you talk about all the rumors and how long it was out there for people. How many people do you think actually stood in the exhibit hall in the bunker and asked about the bunker while they were in
all the time? The classic story is Phil O'Doherty, whose son works here now. Phil O'Doherty, he was cleared on the project, and when the food came in, another reason that you know, the Greenbrier was a good place. You could restock the food, right? The Greenbrier had tons and tons of food coming in all the time. And nobody would notice, except the food storeroom guys, that certain foods were designated for the bunker. So, you know, I think it was maybe he and Bill Zimmerman, there were two of them, and they know they had been cleared. And so certain items would go in and they'd refresh the food in the freezers and things like that. But I remember Phil saying once that he was standing in the exhibit hall talking to this guy, and the guy leans over and says, you know, I hear there's a secret bunker here at the Greenbrier. Is that true? Bill goes, oh no, there's no such, we're standing inside of it. Oh no, there's no such thing, you know. All that rumor goes back to, I think he must talk to Luther Way too. We all told the exact same story. But they did, I remember somebody mentioned they did worry about engineers coming in and asking the same question you did. Mm-hmm. Why are there so many columns in this room? Because it's supporting quite a bit of concrete above it.
The final slide that we have is today's bunker, and the continued interest in it, which I mentioned just a moment ago. And when you took that initial tour, any thought in your mind that 30 years later we'd still be talking about this and giving tour?
And I guess I thought the same thing, you know. Americans have short attention spans, you know, and you know, this is sort of a peculiar thing to say, but I think 9/11 had a lot to do with why people are still coming. I remember, so if we started doing tours, this tour that I gave for employees was in November of 1995. That's when November 4th, 1995 is when the Dateline program aired. And we were just inundated with people who wanted to, oh my God, it was a madhouse. People were gathering across the street. And we didn't have any system. You had to pay cash. So locally, there were people who've been hearing about this for, you know, their whole lives. Well, you know, we got to see this bunker. And, you know, we were just kind of overwhelmed there. And then I guess it was 1996 that we started opening up to guests and non-registered guests. But even by about 2000, I could sort of see interest was waning. Mm-hmm. And but when 9/11, all of a sudden people were real interested in emergency planning. You know, emergency planning is sort of one of those boring things. You know, oh my God, you know, we got to plan for something we know is never going to happen. You know, in general. But I certainly noticed after 9/11, interest spiked, and the numbers of tours, people interested in the tours, really went up. And I think that sort of sense of tension with terrorists that's been with us ever since, all of that is fed into, because this, you know, people can talk about emergency planning, but here was an actual plan that was worked out down to the minors detail, you know, and it was physically built and maintained for all those years. You know, this is the real deal, and it
is amazing. I mentioned it a minute ago, just some of the interest that still comes in, and you and Deanna and I have been involved in countless media who come in, and a lot of them are a lot of fun because, you know, as I said, every one of them thinks they're the first one to do it, and right. It's doing something new, but every one of them kind of has a different take on it. It's kind of fun to see it through other people's eyes and see how they experience it. But one of them, and I don't think this one has aired yet, the Russian TV station that came, was that a year or so ago? Do you remember that?
Yeah. I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it. Remember that one, Bob, when they came in, it was a Russian television station, and their whole concept of their show was this wasn't the only episode, they were going to secrets around the United States, and I think some other countries as well. But the concept of the show, the way they did it, was the host was the host? The host didn't know, right? The host of the show didn't know what the secret was. There was one person on the whole crew that knew about the bunker, knew what the secret was. The host, the camera people, nobody else knew what the bunker was. So they went around with Bob and Deanna and I and saw different aspects of the Greenbrier, and the host was kind of trying to figure out what the secret was going to be that was revealed at the end of the show, which she came nowhere near figuring it out and was completely surprised when we came to the bunker doors. But it's those kind of things that they're fascinating to me, that everybody has a different idea of how they're going to cover this bunker and what story they're going to tell. And it's fun to still see it getting so much attention.
It is. I mean, it's an incredible story. But I must admit, I sometimes get irritated when people say, "Oh, the Greenbrier is a historic place. There's a secret bunker there," and I'm saying, no. This was a historic spot. We've been here for 150 years by the time they started building that bunker, and so that's been part of the experience. People show up, and I've actually talked to people who think the bunker was built as a cover story for the bunker. They somehow, today I think we're sort of overwhelmed with information, too much information about everything. But I think some people think that the whole bunker, the whole Greenbrier, was somehow built as a cover for the bunker. No. So we got to walk them through all that. And I don't know how many times people have come here. I don't know. They must think this is some Holiday Inn or something. It's under some hotel. And they get here and their eyeballs are like, whoa.
And the other thing we always laugh at, the three of us, when we do these stories, is every time they come in and we ask them, so how long do you think you're gonna take on this? And an hour, maybe 2 hours, and then we say, let's mark off our whole day's calendar, because they come in and really see how much there is. It doesn't take an hour or 2 hours to tell the story. There's so much to it.
And I remember somebody's comment that to me, one of the reasons that there's such interest in this bunker is the incongruity of the overt Greenbrier and the covert bunker. As Ted Kleister once said, the bunker has all the creature comforts of a World War II submarine. And one person I stole her line. She said, growing up here in West Virginia, we always thought of the Greenbrier as the height of civilization. And we find out that there's something here for the end of civilization, and they're both together, really, literally interconnected, right here on the same property. I think that adds to when the media people come in and they realize, look at this down here as opposed to that up there.
Absolutely.
And we want them to see that up there because hopefully they will, come and enjoy the Greenbrier, right?
That kind of wraps up what we had on our agenda to talk about today, but if anybody have any questions, anything to do with the bunker, anything to do with the Greenbrier, lottery numbers, betting tips, whatever you need.
Was the bunker ever used?
Was the bunker ever used?
The good news is that it was not used. Because remember, as the story was in the Wash Roast, it literally was the last resort. So it would have only been, it's interesting the way they talk, only been activated. In the early days, they talked about in case of imminent attack on Washington, D.C. And then later, I met the architect of the Capitol who was involved in this, and he used the phrase, if Washington is made uninhabitable, because as time went on, dirty bombs, biological weapons, poison gas, something like that, somehow they had to abandon, it didn't have to be a nuclear attack, some reason they had to abandon Washington, D.C. So something pretty damn catastrophic had to happen. And it was written into the contract, incidentally, that the government can only do this once. The railroad, there's a long contract. They wanted to protect their real estate here. So it turns out the closest it ever came was the Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962. And so, which is almost exactly when it was completed. In fact, by then, the physical bunker was completed, and the West Virginia wing above it was operational. And I first told me that they were still bringing in some communications equipment, but it was usable. It was usable, and you know, I guess I've heard stories over the years how far they went, and you know, where they bring more supply. They certainly brought in more equipment. And I remember talking to one of the Forsyth guys who was here at the time, and he was just told, "Don't go anywhere." You know, during those 13 days there in October of '62, when it looked like the time may be at hand.
Did Fritz ever say, did he think that it was going to be operational at that time? I mean, was he convinced it was going to happen?
Well, he wasn't here at that point.
Oh, he wasn't.
He didn't get here.
That's right, yeah.
Just didn't get it until '71. He was still in the military at that point. You know, it's interesting, you know, he had to resign his commission in the military to keep this a civilian operation.
Right.
So the question was, what do we do with it? I remember Ted Kleisler once saying, since he knew about the bunker, he knew about all the square footage there, he would think, boy, we could use that. And when it finally became available, he said he felt like the dog who caught the car, you know, and what are we going to do with this? And so we immediately started doing tours, just because there was tremendous interest. And also just to pay the bills, you know. You can't just shut the bunker down. All the systems are sort of interconnected here. So, you know, we were charging really just to pay for the utility bills. So there were questions, what are we going to do with this facility, you know? I think there was discussion of putting a bottling plant in there was one idea. There was another idea that the government...
The casino was an idea at one point, right?
Oh yeah. But the casino was only going to be in the exhibit hall, so it was going to be considerably nothing on the scale of this. And so you know, CSX is kind of looking at this. You know, what can we do to generate more revenue beyond what's coming in from the bunker tours? And somewhere along the line, they got this idea of storing corporate records. I know it has to Enron, the whole Enron situation back in the George Bush administration, where Enron was not keeping records, you know, and so Congress passed certain laws that they had to keep more substantial records. And so somebody put two and two together. I think down at CSX that we could offer a secure data storage center, so we could take part of the bunker. Corporations could store their information there, and it was in a secure location. So I guess in 2005 is when we embarked on the big project of upgrading it and creating CSX IP is CSX intellectual property. Again, I have no idea. CSX IP seemed to deal primarily with trademark issues. When I had anyway, so that's been wildly successful, incidentally.
So the Greenbrier leases it to them?
The Greenbrier leases it to CSX IP.
When Mr. Justice bought it, there were all these individual contracts with all this companies, so they decided to just keep CSX IP running the whole thing. It was a lot simpler than trying to transfer all those contracts. So you know, the Justice Family Corporation owns that, just like they own everything else. You know, and so they then sublease it to CSX IP, and so they actually control the whole bunker facility. So that's why what Cam was talking about. Although I think before CSX IP was formed, there were occasions when we were overbooked. We never overbooked, except, and I think some people did stay in there just because they wanted to.
Right.
I also remember a story of people leaving CSX IP, and they were leaving the bunker for the night, and they were shutting everything down. And they realized that this couple over there was being very cozy with each other. And again, thinking, oh, we did it in a bunker. That's a great story. But But they were about to close down and lock the whole facility for the night, and these lovebirds would have been stuck inside the bunker totally by themselves, which would have been a hell of a story, I suppose. But I think I've heard the stories that somewhere along the line before CSXIP.
And just to give you an idea of the scope of the tour, Dan, how many tours do you have in a year?
In a year, let me go by people.
Okay.
We have about 50,000 people a year that tour. I just did the numbers for this past year, 44,000 people, and it was less than the year before, so.
So almost 50,000 people a year touring that, but that's just absolutely amazing to me.
Count.
Right.
Anyway, so.
And back when I first worked there, and I was working at the Greenbrier, people would say, oh, the Dorothy Draper place, or Sam Snead, or fine dining, But nowadays, when you say I work at the Greenbrier, oh, the bunker place, it's impossible to calculate in any sort of dollar figure the public relations value, just a sheer gross public relations value of this bunker. That people contacted me, just last week, and for a blog, and they said that sometimes, I guess, two people do a little research, and there are things on YouTube that I participate in, so they ask Cam if they can find this Conte guy, and so we did a Zoom conference, and he's out in Utah, and it was really sort of unnerving. The guy didn't know anything about the Greenbrier, and he didn't know anything other than there's a bunker at the Greenbrier. That's about all he knew, So I had to kind of walk him through all sorts of whether that'll ever appear, I don't know either.
Yes, sir.
How does the public knowledge of the Greenbrier play into the ability to sell real estate on the property?
How
We
did you
did
get
a
it?
real estate business?
Yes. In other words,
After-
before that, was it restricted because of the contract for the bunker?
It was restricted because of the bunker contract.
Exactly. Well, first of all, in the original contract, the whole Greenbrier, everything went. So the Greenbrier, and at that point, 7,000 acres, the whole thing would go to the government. In the mid-'70s, a new president came in. John Lanahan was his name, and he wanted to get into the real estate business, build private homes. And so the original contract was for 20 years, from 1958 to 1978. And so Mr. Lanahan opened negotiations in 1975 when he came here. And so they amended the contract. So what would go to the government was only about 50 or 60 acres right around here. And so the other part could be developed. So a program, the Creekside cottages that were built along number 5 and 6 of Old White, they were all built in that period, and some private homes. And actually that sort of fizzled out. They sold some homes, but it didn't materialize on the scale that they planned. Well, so once a bunker is shut down, really, at that point, CSX back in the 90s started to look at selling the Greenbrier. In strict business terms, the railroad should have sold the Greenbrier back in the 60s when rail passenger service declined. That was the whole rationale for the railroad owning it. You had to buy a ticket on the railroad to go to the resort the railroad owned. So there were two revenue sources. Well, by the 60s, when passenger traffic declined rapidly with the interstate and the airlines, it sort of undercut the whole rationale. Well, that's part of the reason that the government, the CNO at the time, was interested in this proposal. It gave a purpose. Is it time for lunch yet?
I told you, that's how we got here.
Right. this is all
Same way to
different.
lunch.
Thank you, Bob.
We're down to lunch.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for being here and enjoy the rest of your history weekend.